Page design elements and principles. Obviously, we're talking about web pages. Starting with type on the web, we have macro and micro typography. Macro typography is the general look and feel of the type on your page, and micro typography is the specifics related to spacing letters and words. CSS styles for macro are properties such as font size, font weight, font style, color, line height, and so forth. CSS styles for micro typography are properties such as letter spacing, word spacing, and so on. If we look at this example, we can see what kerning is, what leading is, and what tracking is. Kerning is the adjustment of space between pairs of letters. Leading is the space between two lines. And tracking is the adjustment of space for groups of letters and entire blocks of text. Still under type on the web, let's talk about web-safe fonts. Web-safe fonts are ones available on almost any computer, whether a Mac or a PC. They allow a user to get the same experience as anyone else going to the site. Some popular sans serif fonts are Arial, Helvetica, Geneva, Verdana, and so forth, and some popular serif ones are Georgia, especially Georgia Italic is very nice, Palatino, Times New Roman, and so on. Now, this being said, these days we have a broader selection of fonts than those that come standard on our computer. We can reference a font through a remote URL, such as Google Web Fonts, which are free, or Typekit, for example, which is paid subscription. Or we can download a font family straight to our computer or server and reference it in our CSS. And this method is called the @fontface rule. So if we're using the Google Web Fonts, what we would do is just mention the URL in the head element, and then in the body of our CSS, just say font family and the type name. And if we look at some examples of the Google Web Fonts, Open Sans, Josephine Slap, there are plenty, and we can see them all on a website called awards.com, awards written with 3 W's, and read all details of implementation there. As for the @fontface rule, as we said, we can download a font family straight to the computer and then upload to the server and reference it in our CSS code. So this is the CSS, and we would mention the font family, the source, URL, font weight, font style, and so forth. And here are some examples. Audimat, Delicious, and so forth. All examples are shown in the awards.com website. Moving on to font sizes. We know from a previous lecture that 16 pixels is equal to 1 EM, is equal to 100% and 12 points, provided that 16 pixels is the default mentioned in the browser. And so this is an example of how we would see a font written in 9 pixels as opposed to 18 pixels. When working on a fluid website, we use the EM or percent unit of measurement in CSS that are both scalable. We know this again from a previous lecture. When working on a fixed website, we use the pixel unit of measurement in CSS, which is fixed and cannot scale in size. The point unit of measurement is also fixed but mainly used in print. And the default font size is mentioned in the browser. This is a screenshot of Firefox's preferences area, and my default happens to be Verdana and 16 pixels. And usually 16 pixels is most computers' default font size. The default font size is set by the browser, Firefox preferences under content, but can be changed. Text can be set in absolute sizes or relative sizes, relatively to the default size set by the browser. So absolute sizes or relative sizes, XX smaller, medium, XX large, and so forth. Hard to read fonts. These are fonts that you shouldn't ever use. There are three kinds of fonts here, and they're very hard to read and pretty ugly, if I may say that. They are definitely no-nos. So if a typeface is hard to read, the reader automatically thinks that the instructions are hard to do. Typefaces with difficult to recognize shapes are hard to read. These are very amateur fonts, and a good graphic or web designer will never use these fonts. Tiny fonts. Tiny fonts are hard to read and can disrupt reading. It's nice to have small font, but tiny font is not logical and uncomfortable. Text and alignments, still under type on the web. We have two examples here. Type alignment gives order to a page and adds presentation, giving it design and purpose. The two examples that you see are aligned on the left side. Line length is the length of a line, and it normally should not exceed 40 to 50 characters. And that's because you want the user to read comfortably, and when they reach the end of the first line, you want them to find the beginning of the second line. But if your line is too long, if it is over 40 or 50 characters, when the user goes to the second line in an attempt to read, they can't find the second line easily. That's why the paragraph's line length should not exceed 40 to 50 characters. A paragraph with centered text is hard to read. So this first one is centered text. It is hard to read because our eye is trained to go back to the same horizontal position and down one line, which is right under the letter L under the word London. Hence, left alignment is best. Justified alignment, which is the second example, gives even margins on the left and the right, but has poor word spacing. You see this odd big space between merit and this odd space between US and medal. There's a joke that says you don't want rivers between your words. You don't want to sail a boat. Right alignment is good for short amounts of text, and that's this example. So centered text, left alignment text, justified, and right alignment. Text and backgrounds. A paragraph on a background whose color has no contrast with that of the text is hard to read. If your background is white and your paragraph is extremely light gray, it is difficult for the user to read what's written. Text on a patterned background is hard to read. The background is very busy and we can hardly read anything from this paragraph. Text on a noisy background is also hard to read. Styling text, still under type on the web. When type is organized hierarchically on a web page, example titles are bigger than paragraph, etc. So here you can see the title is big, bold, blue. It's a different font size, font color from the rest of the paragraph. That plays the role of indicator of where to start reading and how to proceed. So it's very important for things not to look equally important on a page. A visual difference should exist between the headline and the body copy by using different styles, fonts, sizes, and colors. Styling text provides visual interest. Images. Images should be of good quality. This example on the left features one big dominant image right here with captions and same size thumbnails. So these are thumbnails They are the same size, and they have text right next to them and under them. Text and imagery should always be paired, but a good balance between the two is very important. How much text versus how much image? Is it an image or is it a thumbnail? And so forth. The grid in web design. The use of the grid layout in print publications goes back hundreds of years. The grid is also used in web design because grid-based layouts enhance both the appearance and usability of a website. A grid helps to organize information into a solid layout, allowing visual structure and balance. When a grid is used consistently across all the pages of a site, it reinforces the sense of order and unity. A website designed on a grid enhances the visual experience of a user. Let's look at this example. This is the home page of the CNN website, and we actually do not see a grid because a grid is invisible. We do not see the horizontal or the vertical lines of a grid, but we feel the presence of a grid because the elements of the page are nicely sitting on something strong. We feel that there are nice alignments. We feel structure and order and unity. And so there is definitely a grid. In fact, there is a 3-column grid which creates order, structure, nice alignments. As you can see, the CNN logo is nicely aligned with the image underneath it, the links under that, and so forth. Now, if I show you the next slide, you're going to see what happens if the elements on this page were not sitting on a grid, if they were randomly scattered around the page. Let's see how that looks. Is this a visually appealing page? I don't think so. It's a layout that is random and not based on a grid. It creates disorder, chaos, and the viewer is not sure where to start looking. As you can see, nothing is aligned. The CNN logo is floating on the top left corner. The links are scattered all over the place. There are odd white spaces between these two images and at the bottom, and so forth. So it is very important to have a grid. And speaking of layouts, a layout is usually spread out on wide screens, but stacked on narrow screens. So this is CNN's homepage on a wide screen, and the layout is spread out. But on a small screen, on a narrow screen, it is stacked. The layout is stacked. It's a 1-column layout as opposed to a 3-column layout on a wide screen. But since nowadays we have a wide range of devices that spans a wide range of screen resolutions, typically between 320 and 2048 pixels or more, from desktops to laptops to tablets to iPhones and so forth, we must create multiple layouts to accommodate the different screen resolutions. This is what we call responsive design. A layout that works great on a 1280 pixel screen resolution will not look that good on a mobile device whose screen resolution is 640 pixels, for example.